Shadow of the Giant by Orson Scott Card is the fourth book in the Ender Shadow series. I'm rereading all of the books in the Ender Quintet and the Ender Shadow series this year, one per month, and I'll be reading The Last Shadow, the culmination of both of these book series at the end of the year. So I had been hoping that this would be a return to form after the disappointment I felt after reading Shadow Puppets, and for the most part it was. Although I have one bone to pick with Orson Scott Card where I might get a little angry, but that'll be in the spoiler section. Because this will be a mostly spoiler-free review. I will do all of the spoiler-free stuff first, and then I'll have a short spoiler section. I'll give you a time stamp that you can skip over, and you can jump to the end where I give you the wrap-up and my final thoughts on this book. So, Shadow of the Giant's the fourth book, and we start at the very beginning of this book, and we realize right away how big this tale has become. In both Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow, this started as a very small coming-of-age tale with one character, and it's gradually expanded so that we see at the beginning of this book that our battle school children are all over the globe, and they've all been employed or utilized or used by their own home country's military. And they're kind of being used as military commanders to get more power. All of these countries see them as a great asset that they can increase their influence in the globe. So we see Hansu is in China, we see Ali is the Caliph of the Muslim nations. We see these characters all over the place. Bean and Petra, of course, are with Peter Wiggin, who is the hegemon. And they're trying to unite the earth in one benevolent rule. So, one of the things that was a big problem in Shadow Puppets is because the story's become big, the plotting was kind of a mess in that book. Thankfully, it's back to form with Card in this book, because I did feel that this was very well plotted. And one way that he did a great job at keeping the focus on the story as to what's important, the A story being Bean, Petra, and Peter, is he utilized the epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter in a way that told us the secondary stories. And the way that he did this is they were usually email exchanges between some of the secondary characters and the second, third, fourth storylines. So it was a way for him to give you just a bit of an exposition dump in order to tell you what's going on, rather than wasting half a chapter on a point of view that can be just summarized in a paragraph or two. And even if you don't like exposition dumps, it works well, because what is an email but an exposition dump? So that worked really, really well. I felt that in the first half of Shadow Puppets, there was no focus to the narrative. But this book, I felt that the focus was back right where it should be, on Bean, Petra, and Peter, as they're trying to unite the globe under one rule. There are two secondary storylines that are interesting in this book as well. One is Bean and Petra trying to find their embryos which were stolen in the previous book. So that's one. And the other one, it's very interesting that we get Graf and Rackham back from the first book in the series. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to take all of the battle school grads and kind of take them off the chessboard, and to put them into space like they did with Ender, to have them lead these various colonies that are leaving Earth to go to different worlds to establish human colonies all across the galaxy. So that was a very interesting just prospect of what they're trying to do, thinking that if they can do that, if they can take all these military commanders away from all of these countries, they have less incentive to try to being invading their neighbors and influencing their sphere of influence and so forth. So that was an interesting subplot as well. But this is primarily all of those puzzle pieces coming back together in trying to unite the globe under Peter, the hegemon's rule. At least that's what Bean and Petra and Peter are trying to do. So from a character standpoint, Card was back on point, with the exception of one female character, which I'm going to be angry about later in the video. I almost threw the book across the room. But besides that, it's kind of a return to form. I mentioned in my Shadow Puppets review that I felt that the characters were just off, that it almost felt like Card gave the book to a ghostwriter, because the characters didn't feel right, but they felt themselves again. So thankfully that was a return to form, because I have enjoyed Bean quite a bit. I did enjoy Petra a lot, not in the last book, but I enjoyed her in this book as well. And Peter has more of a primary role in this book as well, and we see a lot of him. I'm going to talk about his character arc in the spoiler section, but I feel that he was just such a well-portrayed character in this book in particular. But I will talk about the entire arc of his character from the beginning of this series to this point, because I thought it was very well done on Card's part. So that was a return to form. Additionally, the world building finally built up a little bit more. I felt that it kind of stagnated. The thing that I liked is we got glimpses of the Earth in Ender's Shadow, and then Shadow the Hedgeman, we got a lot of great backstory, understanding where this future Earth is, where all the factions are, who the big players are. We really got to understand that, and then it didn't really progress much in the third book. This book, it progressed a little bit more. And there's a couple things I found very interesting. One of which is we finally find out why America is not a superpower in this futuristic Earth. And I found it more interesting, I think, on a meta level than anything. But essentially, America had embraced capitalism so much that they saw that there was no profit in being the world's police force. So they just kind of pulled themselves from the international stage and kind of closed their borders and became their own thing and worried more about their economy than helping out across the world. Why I find that interesting on a meta level is because Orson Scott Card is a very staunch, outspoken conservative, and that's kind of against his party lines to not be embracing capitalism as, the be-all, end-all of society. So I found that interesting on a meta level. There was another interesting aspect of world building that I liked, how he brought some of the smaller nations forward and you find out what they've done, but he also told us some of his views on Earth's past history. I've liked this in previous installments where he talks about, people in the Iliad and the Odyssey and analyzing them from a military mind. But in this case, he analyzed American presidents, and he basically said that George Washington was the only great American president. And what did he say? He basically summed up Adams as an ineffectual nothing and Jefferson as a vindictive narcissist. But I found that very interesting because I know that Card is very well read and he knows his military history very well. I don't know if his assessment of those gentlemen were correct or not, but again, that was another one on a meta level because I know that conservative thought generally tends to revere the founding fathers, and he kind of just, dissed them quite a bit. So that was kind of interesting as well. From a world building standpoint, though, I don't like what I've seen in this book, namely with the pessimism that he has about Earth's future, most specifically with the Muslim nations. He sees the Muslim nations and he portrays them a lot like what we see with Islam today, where you have a vast majority of Islam that is peaceful, and then you have a fundamentalist side that is very violent and warlike. And if anything, he kind of pushes that side of things and makes them a little bit more present. I've seen some reviewers say that this is Card's bigotry shining through. I'm never going to call an author a name like that based on something they write in a work of fiction. But I will say it is pessimistic because it's very easy to look at Earth's history and come to a different conclusion about where the state of Islam may be a millennium from now. Now, I'm not a religious scholar, but it's very easy to look at the roots of a current religion which is not violent, Christianity, and realize it has a very violent past. You look back and you see the Crusades and the Inquisition and even smaller things like Salem witch trials and things like that. There's a lot of violence in Christianity's past. But I don't think that in the year 2022 you would characterize Christianity as a violent religion. So why is it too much to think that in the future Earth, hundreds of years, maybe even millennia from now, that Islam won't evolve into a non-violent religion as Christianity did? So that's just something that I thought about. I'm not going to say anything disparaging about the author because I don't know the man, but I will say that I think he's taken a very pessimistic view of the future Earth in this regard regarding is the Islamic nations. So one thing I can say universally about all of these Enders books is that thematically they get a little less dense as you go through. Ender's Game blew my mind on a thematic scale. Ender's Shadow, not quite as much, but still there, and then it's kind of diminished, and the same thing is here. Granted, you could say that this was a book that is just tying up the loose ends, so the themes are less important to getting that plot structure where it needs to go. But it was a little bit of a disappointment that I didn't have a lot of these things that just kind of made me think, that blew my mind. But there were a couple. First of all, I'm still just impressed, even if I disagree with Card's, analysis of our founding fathers, or if I do agree, I really don't feel that I know enough, to be honest. I do like his analysis of military leadership, and I like when he emphasizes that. He does a really good job with that. I think another theme that he really missed an opportunity, at least in this book, but I think it's set up for future books, is just the thematic idea of nature versus nurture. As Bean and Petra search for these embryos, one gets away. And that's just a minor spoiler, but you know it because the first chapter of the book, you meet this woman who has been implanted with one of these embryos. And to say that she's a piece of work is a little understatement. So you really start to think, at least I did, what is this child going to be like? Is the nature of the child being the genetic offspring of two of the most intelligent people on the planet going to shine through? Or is the nurturing of this mother figure who is a total disaster of a human being going to shine through? So that's going to be interesting to see that play out. I wish there would have been a little bit more of that in this book because that is an idea that I find very compelling, nature versus nurture. All right, so I want to talk spoilers here very briefly, especially the one that almost made me throw the book. But if you want to skip the spoiler section, I'm going to put a timestamp up here. Just skip to that timestamp so we can get to the wrap up because I do want to talk about that very, very beautiful ending of this book. So spoilers in 3, 2, 1. All right, so the first thing I need to address is what made me want to throw this book across the room, and that is Card's character assassination once again of a female character. But let's examine Card with his portrayal of women in this series. We really only have 3 main female characters in this series. We have Petra, we have Verlomi, and then we have Sister Carlotta. But I'm going to take her away because, first of all, she died in the second book. And second of all, as a Catholic nun, you could say that she's sexless. So we have Petra and Verlomi. So let's review Petra. Petra, back in Ender's Game, is the only girl part of Ender's final team in the last battle. And the only member of the team that breaks down and has to be removed from their station. So right away, he kind of does the girl wrong. Ender's Shadow, parallel story. But we see Bean's perspective on Petra. Basically, he doesn't think she's very smart, or she's at least naive, because she somehow leads Ender into that shower where he ends up killing Bonesaw. So we don't have a high opinion of Petra at all. Shadow the Hedgeman, finally we rewrite the script. The first chapter is from Petra's point of view. We find out that she is intelligent, she's three-dimensional, she has a lot of remorse for breaking down in the last battle, but she's also very, very smart. She's the only one of all of these battle school grads that when they get captured, figures out a way to get word out to where they are so that they can get rescued. She's a great character in that book. I really loved her in that book. She had a lot of agency. She had a lot of depth. Really enjoyed that character. And then Shadow Puppets, which you may remember my rant review there. Oh, God. Petra in Shadow Puppets just wants to have Bean's babies. That's her entire purpose of life. She's no longer this three-dimensional, brilliant young woman, military, political mind, one of the smartest people on the planet. No, babies. So that's what he did to Petra. Now let's talk about what he does, Card that is, to Verlomi. We first meet Verlomi in Shadow of the Hedgeman. She is a battle school graduate, but not part of Ender's team, so she's not that top tier of commander, but very smart. She went through battle school, she graduated battle school. And she proves that she's very brave because she is one of the ones that helps Petra and the others escape. And then we see she's very smart, and she comes up with some great methods to help her home country of India. She's very resourceful as she leads India through this passive resistance, much like Gandhi, and unites the country behind her, and she becomes kind of a mythic figure, almost a living goddess. And she just proves that she just has a lot of political acumen and knowing what to do to lead her people. So we see that. And even if you believe that maybe Verlomi starts drinking her own Kool-Aid and start believing in her own divinity, the character assassination that Card enacts on this character is just horrible. So Verlomi realizes that India's strength has kind of stagnated. If it's going to get stronger, she needs to form an alliance. So she wants to form an alliance with Peter Wiggin and the Hegemony. She sees Peter as the perfect person to form this alliance. I think she also should realize that she might be a little smarter than Peter. She made it to battle school and he didn't. But no, the way that Card figures that Verlomi is going to convince Peter is not through her brilliant mind. She gets naked and tries to seduce him. Yep. That wasn't where I wanted to throw the book. Let's continue. That doesn't work. Peter sees through that, says, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Very next scene, what does she do? She does the same thing with Ally. She tries to seduce Ally to join the Muslim and Hindu nations. It works. So Ally's a little weaker than Peter was. That wasn't where I wanted to throw the book, although I was not happy at this point. Because this brilliant character, brilliant mind, resourceful character, now just sees herself that like the only way that she can further her nation is to sleep with other people. Okay, so let's get to the book throwing. So we do start to see a little bit of Verlomi's character breaking down through Ally's eyes. Ally knows that he's smarter than her. And that's not a gender thing. He was part of Ender's team, so he's like an S-tier commander. But we see that they're at odds, and Verlomi is not going to listen to Ally. She wants India to invade China. So she makes that determination, we're going to invade China. But before we go, you need to put your baby in my belly before I go. That's when I almost threw this book. I mean, come on, man. Orson Scott Card, what is wrong? What's wrong with you? You think that at some point in a woman's life, all that matters is the babies? These are two of the most intelligent women on the planet, and all you can give them is, oh, we have to have babies. I have to have that person's baby inside of me? My God. Now listen, if this were written in the 1950s, where gender roles were a lot different, where the 1950s, a woman's place was in the house and the man earned the bread and the woman, had babies and took care of the house, I wouldn't like it, but I'd understand it. This was written in 2005, and the only two female characters in here just are devices to get pregnant. I don't want to say the man's sexist, because again, in my discussion of religion, I said I wouldn't call him bigoted because of his portrayal of the Muslim nation, but if you did, I don't think I'd argue with you, because his portrayal of women in this series is appallingly bad. That's where I almost threw this book across the room. All right, well, let's talk about a character arc done well, and that's Peter. When we first met Peter in Ender's Game, he was potentially a psychopath from Ender's eyes. In fact, that was the first question when I did my Ender's Game review. In the spoiler section, I asked the question, is Peter a psychopath? And my conclusion was no, but he's probably a sociopath. And up until this book, we really didn't know. we really weren't sure his motives. Was he truly trying to unite the earth under his rule for all the good reasons, like he said? Or was it typical politician wanting power and wanting to unite the world, but under my rule? And it was nice to see in this book that his motives were pure. That was very satisfying, especially because personally, I always have a low opinion of politicians. I think on both sides. I think most people that go into politics, they do it for the power. They don't do it because they want to serve people. So it was nice, at least in a fictional universe, to see a character that was truly doing all of this for the right reasons. I love the scene where Peter's mother tells him she's proud of him. And then he breaks down in the next scene. He's a young man who's about to be the most powerful person on the planet, but he still wants his parents' approval. That felt so real to me. And I also liked how he thought back where he didn't think his parents loved him. And that was just childish insecurities, but he thought that his parents loved Valentine, his parents loved Ender, and they didn't love him. So I love that scene where his mom told him how proud she was of him, and where he realized that all of those feelings were unfounded. I also enjoyed the scene with Peter, and I don't remember if it was Graf or Rackham. I think it was Graf, where he found out why he wasn't admitted to battle school. We always thought up to this point that it was because of his temperament, which it kind of was, but it wasn't what we thought. They analyzed Peter as a potential political leader, not military leader. They didn't think he would have what it takes to make that hard call, to be as ruthless as Ender was in that final battle. So it was his temperament, but it wasn't the way that we saw it. And I thought that was a great twist on that character from Card. And then the final scene with Peter, his conversation with Ender through the Ansible, where 70-year-old Peter is talking to 16-year-old Ender, and he's just kind of apologizing. So beautiful. Such a cathartic ending to Peter's story. All right, spoiler-free people are back. Let's talk about the very ending. I just mentioned in the spoiler section how cathartic this ending in this book was, and it really, really is. In many ways, this completes an entire arc. Although there are two more books in the Shadow series, this is the end of the story on Earth. And it was very, very well done. Very, very beautiful ending. This entire book, I was kind of waffling between 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 on my rating scale, and the ending cemented it as a very solid 4 out of 5. It was a beautiful conclusion to this part of the saga, and I'm glad that after my disappointment from Shadow Puppets that my faith in this series was renewed. So what's next? I'm actually not going to read the next one in the Shadow series. I'm going to dip back into the Ender Quintet and read Ender in Exile. The reason is when I read these, I seem to remember some overlap between these books, between this book and Shadows in Flight. And I don't remember exactly what the overlap was, so I'm going to read these two in publication order. So this is considered book 1.5 of the Ender series, because it takes place before or between Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead. So I'm going to read this one next. I am a little nervous because this is notoriously known as the worst one in the Ender saga. In fact, it was the lowest rated one that I gave when I tended to give everything 4 stars on Goodreads. So I'm a little nervous about that, and I saw a review where someone called it not only the worst Ender book, but the worst book in the English language. So my expectations are very low, but I will be reading Ender in Exile next month. If you're following all of these reviews, I will drop that review the last week of July. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching this review. If you liked it, please give me a like. Consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to interact with you more. You can find me on Twitter and Goodreads. I'm on those platforms just about every day. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.